Can you hear me?
Yep.
Good. I'd like you to comment on the issue of climate change, which some people are saying is changing very rapidly into climate disaster, and not in 100 years, but in maybe a few decades. And what kind of impact that's going to have on our capitalism, our late Western capitalism, and all the things that are linked to it, like the war on terror, and the issues that come out of it, like the terrible competition there will be for dwindling resources and energy as climate change bites. Thank you.
Well, of course, that's a major issue right now, even at the G8 meetings. By now, I think there's very little doubt that human activity is significantly impacting the increase of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, of soot and other particle matter and so on, which is heating the Earth probably to dangerous levels, maybe to catastrophic levels. There's also these are what are called nonlinear processes. Small change can lead to a massive effect, and it could happen suddenly. It could be delayed, but it's likely to be very significant and severe. As usual, the major victims will be the poorest people. It's expected that the worst effects will be in places like sub-Saharan Africa or Bangladesh or arable areas of Pakistan and so on. Or near many small countries might just disappear, go underwater. The richer countries will, as usual, find certain ways to adapt, may even partially benefit. So Canada is looking forward to opening the Northwest Passage and declaring sovereignty, which it never cared about before because it was, ice-filled. But the effects will certainly be significant. And one thing we can be confident about is that the longer we delay in doing something about it, the worse they're going to be. Right now, the U.S. alone is dragging its feet on doing something about it. This is incidentally another one of those cases, and there are many, where when we talk about the U.S., it's kind of misleading. The U.S. government is dragging its feet. The U.S. population for years has been strongly in favor of taking aggressive action about this. For example, the Kyoto Protocol was strongly supported by the population, rejected by the government, both the executive and Congress, bipartisan, rejected by the government, strongly approved by the population. In fact, so strongly approved by the population that at the time of the 2004 presidential election, a majority of Bush voters thought that he supported the Kyoto protocols. A reason, well, it's such an obvious thing to support that our man, this nice guy who you want to meet in a bar, he must support them too. Well, that tells you something about American democracy. For one thing, about the elections. The public relations firms that run the elections are very careful to marginalize issues, keep them off the table, and to focus on what are called qualities. Is he a nice guy? Would you like to meet him in a bar? Is he sort of friendly, and so on and so forth? Does he look you straight in the eye? That kind of thing. Is he religious enough? But not where do they stand on issues. That's too dangerous because the public disagrees on a host of major issues, mentioned a couple, with the elite consensus. So therefore you got to keep the public marginalized. And they are. This is one example. What would the effects be? Well, we can't predict in detail, but we can anticipate that they'll be severe. Will this lead to wars? Well, it's already happening, so we don't have to predict that. The struggle and the conflict in Darfur, for example, which is horrendous, is in certain respects a global warming war. Regions that had been shared by farmers and nomadic groups are now declining, disappearing. There's a struggle over territories, and that's leading to a lot of vicious atrocities. It's not the only factor, others are, but it's exacerbating the conflict in significant ways. Take resource wars. Well, one of them, we're now, right now, in fact, happens to be the 40th anniversary of one major resource war, namely Israel-Palestine. That's a pretty arid area. One of the major water resources is the Jordan River, or what used to be the Jordan River. There isn't much of a Jordan River left anymore. It's kind of a trickle. But it used to be a river. What happened? Israel essentially hijacked the river. It took where the waters fall down a big rift into the river, they were simply picked up by the Israeli, what's called the National Water Carrier. Big pipeline goes down to the Negev. And if you want to find the waters of the Jordan, you look in that pipeline. The 1967 war, to a significant extent, had to do with control over water resources. That includes both the headwaters of the Jordan and also the aquifer, this big aquifer, which is under the West Bank and it's sort of near the official border. And Israel wants to use the aquifer. It had already been tapping into it before the 67 war, but after the 67 war, it controlled it. By now, Israel controls the West Bank aquifer, and you look at the figures, I don't have them in my head right now, the overwhelming majority of that water goes to Israeli Jews, not Palestinians. In West Bank settlements, you find illegal settlements in the West Bank. You find nice lawns, swimming pools, so on and so forth, plenty of water. In a neighboring Arab village, people may have to either get their water brought in trucks, which is prohibitively expensive, or walk for 3 hours to a well somewhere up in the hills where they can get some water and bring it back home. This is right next door. Same was going on in Gaza. The current Israeli plans, and I should really to be accurate, they are U.S.-Israeli plans. Israel can do nothing without the massive diplomatic, military, economic, and ideological support from the United States, and the tacit agreement, silence of Europe, which goes along more or less, apart from a couple of words. So the U.S.-Israeli plans, the current ones, are to annex the regions which happen to control the West Bank aquifer, what's called the separation wall, which is now an annexation wall officially, is intended to annex regions behind the wall, which include much of the arable land in the West Bank and also are the kind of nice suburbs of Jerusalem and Tel Aviv, but also happen to control the water, the West Bank aquifer. That essentially leaves, that's only one piece of the annexation proposals. Very small. Israel's also planning to annex the Jordan Valley, and again, arable land and what's left of the water. So yeah, there was a water war 40 years ago. It's now its 40th anniversary. And we can expect a good deal more of such things. I mean, take the invasion of Iraq, for example. Except for fanatics like Tony Blair and a lot of the press, it's pretty obvious that a major goal, if not the major goal, was to increase U.S. control over the oil resources of the region. I mean, that's transparent. But it's more than that. Iraq also has water resources, which are scarce in the region. That's why Iraq was the cradle of Western civilization, Mesopotamia. It had ample water resources, and they're a precious resource and going to become an even more precious resource in the future. Similar things are happening in India and Pakistan and elsewhere. It's a worldwide phenomenon. That's a serious problem. The problem of utilization of water resources